Hello and welcome to Attentive Healthcare Solutions webinar, NextGen 5.9.2, 8.4.2, Favorite Features and Added Functionality. My name is Chelsea Grover and I'm the Marketing Communications Coordinator for Attentive. I'd like to take a moment to explain the process for today's presentation. First, I'd like to mention this webinar will be recorded. We'll send out a copy of the slides and recording within the next week. Next, for those of you who aren't familiar with Attentive, I wanted to share a bit of who we are with you. We specialize specifically in NextGen healthcare, and we are passionate about providing solutions for our healthcare provider partners, which in turn help them to improve patient care, enhance the patient experience, and maintain a financially healthy practice. To sum it up, we do everything NextGen. We also have some NextGen add-on products for NextGen ChartGuard and Refund Manager. Next, I wanted to mention an upcoming educational webinar that we'll be presenting on February 27th on the topic of submitting 2018 MIPS data using NextGen HQM. In that webinar, we will provide an overview of the NextGen Health Quality Measures web portal functionality and updates. We will walk you through the submission process from start to finish and identify new portal features that make submitting data even easier than before. We'll be sending out an invitation to that in a few weeks, so keep your eyes peeled for it. Okay, so back to today's webinar on NextGen version 5.9.2, 8.4.2. First, I wanted to mention that we have a lot of information in this webinar. We're hoping to go through it at a pace that will allow us to stick to our 1-hour window, but there's a chance that we will go over. We will be recording this, so if we go over and if you need to jump off the call to move on to the next task in your day, you can always watch the parts you missed when we send the recording out. Likewise, I wanted to mention that with all the inclement weather throughout a large portion of the country, there is a great likelihood of the presentation getting bumpy. But again, we'll make the recording available, so don't be alarmed if you lose connection to the webinar. As far as questions go, we'll open the floor up to questions from you. We'll answer all the questions at the end, but you may type them in the questions area of the webinar control panel whenever they occur to you. And finally, for audio clarity purposes, everyone's phone will remain muted throughout the entire webinar. And again, questions may be entered in the questions box. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce our presenters for today. Lindsay Lanning is our Industry Affairs Manager, Cynthia Kincaid is Vice President of Client Solutions, and Adam Boron will also be available to help with questions at the end. So Lindsay, the webinar is all yours. Feel free to get started when you're ready.
Great. Well, thank you, Chelsea. Well, hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar on NextGen 5.9.2.8.4.2 Favorite Features. I know it's been a little while since we've been able to host an educational webinar due to the holidays as well as MGMA and UGM conferences, so it is definitely good to be back with all of you. I do apologize in advance for my voice. I'm hoping it'll stay with me throughout the presentation today. Battling a cold just in time for this lovely polar vortex weather we're experiencing here in Columbus, Ohio. I'm sure some of you on the call are experiencing as well, wherever you may be. But the good news is we have a lot of great content lined up for this year, and as always, if there's a topic you want us to cover, don't hesitate to let us know. So getting back on topic here, because as Chelsea mentioned, we have a lot to cover. We know NextGen versions 5.9.2, 8.4.2 are here, and we wanted to be one of the first to tell you about our favorite features and newly added functionality. So over the next hour, we're going to take you through the new features in the EHR, PM, some specialty specific ones as well. And then also, of course, incorporate tips and tricks from our infamous team of NexPerts. So up first on our agenda today is just introducing you to the NextGen rebranding changes. Now, I'm sure most of you have heard these, but since we will be using the updated terminology in today's webinar, we thought we would include a quick refresher. So here are all the application and product name changes. I actually printed this little table out and tacked it up at my desk as a quick reference because, let's be honest, old habits kind of die hard here. KBM switching to Adaptive Content Engine is still going to get me. Some of the other key changes are going to be RTS going to Eligibility Inquiry and Rosetta Holding Tank to Clinical Message Manager. Those, I think, are going to be the hardest to transition in my mind, whereas the EHR and PM, as well as you'll see document management and BBP aren't too big of changes, just slightly modified. We also had a logo change. I'm sure everyone is pretty familiar with this by now, but the NextGen logo is going to be updated to this orange color with the N on application launcher, login screens, loading screens, and the VCP logo. All right, now that we've got some of those housekeeping items out of the way, let's go ahead and just get started by diving into the EHR new features. I did want to give you just an overview of what we're going to touch on within the EHR regarding these new features, and as you can see, it's a lot, which I think is a good thing. We're going to see some changes and added functionality in almost every part of the EHR with this upgrade, so let's go ahead and get started. First up, my new favorite name to say, Adaptive Content Engine, which we know because of our little sheet is the KBM. This transition to the Adaptive Content Engine is going to be a multi-release initiative with the hopes of improving performance and reliability of the templates, as well as eliminating the loss of template customizations after upgrades and allow hopefully for faster development. So all really good things in my book that were major pain points, especially for customized clients. So this combined release, 592.842, will not actually execute a direct swap of all the KBM Classic templates to the NextGen Adaptive Content Engine templates. This EHR 592 is actually going to support both the NextGen Adaptive Content Engine and KBM Classic templates side by side. So the plan is to have the two environments live together for several releases. This release will tentatively include 41 templates that will be converted to the new XAML format. These specific templates were selected because they're actually not typically customized, but they are frequently used, and they may have had some performance trouble in that classic KBM version. So these newly translated templates are included in the clinical content workflows, and they're going to coexist with those legacy TXML templates. The look and feel is pretty consistent to 841 and previous versions with no real impact on the workflow. And just to kind of see an example of what the classic versus re-platform templates look like, here's the physical exam template comparison. You can see why I said the look and feel are consistent with previous versions and really shouldn't impact the end user workflow. It really is, in my opinion, just giving these templates a facelift to look cleaner, crisper, and updated. Moving on to our first new feature is the Encounter Document Search. Users can now search for keywords within generated documents from past encounters. So there's an added search icon to launch a search window on the Patient History and Categories tab in the History bar. Users can use keywords and filter by document type and encounter date range. So this is going to allow clinical staff to easily locate generated documents that have been added to past encounters, which is going to be especially useful when past information needs to be reviewed. So this updated the search function that was already in place to allow you to search documents and also search within specific documents or a combination of documents using those keywords. But I do want to mention only documents that have been generated in the patient's chart are going to be searchable. Now, once you do search a keyword, the user will then see a list of search results. Exact matches will display at the top of the list, and matching criteria will display in the matches column. And then partial matches are going to be listed under those. The columns on the search results window include, which you can kind of see here from that screenshot, are going to be document, encounter, matches, and then date modified and document format. And then all you have to do is click the document in the list to load in the EHR. Next, looking at HIE documents, NextGen added the ability to rename HIE documents in the patient chart. I think NextGen realized users needed the ability to rename an HIE document to essentially differentiate the document and provide a more meaningful name. Don't worry though, the original name and the date that it was renamed will be stored, and that can be tracked in advanced audit. Also, any custom view names won't change. So for a user to actually rename the HIE document, simply right-click the HIE document in the categories view and choose the rename option. By default, that current document name is going to populate the new document name field. Click that clear icon to clear the field for that free text, and then just type in the new document name and click OK. I will point out this feature does require a system admin right. It's in modules and then EHR documents HIE. And the update act is what controls this feature. In addition to renaming these documents, there's also the added ability to delete an HIE document. So according to users, they need the ability to delete an HIE document when they might have imported that in an error. So the delete encounter utility is going to be expanded to also allow the HIE documents to be deleted. However, the document ID, user ID, person ID, and then date deleted will be tracked for HUM reporting in the advanced audit. So to delete an HIE document, select the HIE document and click delete. Click that delete button, and then you're going to see this imported data warning, and you're going to have to click yes to then delete it. Now, an important note here, any data imported from a document will not be removed when the document is deleted, so keep that in mind. Now, there are two permissions in system admin involved with this functionality. First is going to be the permission to run the delete encounter utility under operations encounters, then delete patient encounter. And then second, the permission for EHR documents under modules, specifically that delete right makes the HIE tab and the delete encounter utility visible. So please make note here, if either one of the permissions is given, the utility is going to be accessible. So essentially you do have these three access rights configurations that you can apply to this feature. So if neither permission is granted, your users are going to get an access denied message. If only the delete patient encounter permission is given, the user will get the warning when trying to click on the HIE documents tab. And then if only the EHR documents HIE permission is given, the user will get the warning when they're trying to click on the encounters tab within the utility. So there is some setup to be done if you would like your users to have this ability. Looking at the EHR report writer next, there's a new report for care guidelines. This will use stored procedures to retrieve data rather than templates. Care guidelines templates will be disabled from the report writer. So to set up the report, you want to access the EHR report writer, enterprise reports, and then that SP tab. You're going to select the stored procedures checkbox, and then set the filter options for enterprise ID, practice ID, and guideline name. Just an important note here that we figured out through our own trial and error, the guideline name needs to match the care guideline exactly. Our next new feature is going to be centered on coordination of care along the care continuum. So this is going to add the primary care provider details to the patient information window, and that's going to display across all templates. So this is typically done in PM. This list is going to come from the provider master table. However, free text entries will not display in the EHR. So from a workflow perspective, no real changes here. Users may notice they might not need to document the PCP details in the EHR if they were doing so previously, but just some more info for you to see at the point of care. There have been 2 updates made regarding vital signs alerts. So the NG-KBM vital signs were enhanced to include adult BMI range alert configuration. I know alerts were available before, but they were hard-coded. These alerts are preloaded from the CDC guidelines, so some configuration may need to be done if a practice wants different alert details. Alerts are going to display on all templates where the adult BMI data displays, including vital signs and the health promotion plan. Also, that second screenshot here, the asthma flow sheet template was updated to include all appropriate vital signs alerts. As you can see, this will display any out of range alerts for vital signs. NextGen has also beefed up their Zika screening tools. I know the freezing weather has a lot of people traveling south, or at least it has me thinking about it. To places like Mexico, Puerto Rico, which coincidentally enough, the CDC considers at-risk areas for Zika. So there's a new questionnaire template for the patient and their partner. Previously, you could document Zika virus exposure under the contagion link. Now, to access Zika virus questionnaires, you're going to select that same contagion risk link, select the Zika virus under exposure, and then this will actually launch the Zika pregnancy screening link. You can then use the template to screen both the patient and their partner. You can see it's divided into 2 sections, and it even includes the CDC link to review information from the CDC. This screening questionnaire also includes a link to the immunization module if a vaccine is needed. Looking at the rest of our screening tools, all screening tools templates will now include a perform date field added to the screening tools grid to basically provide more detail in the documentation. This previously only existed on some of the screening templates, so really made this uniform throughout. The perform date will automatically populate with the encounter date. So the user may have to manually change the date if it's different. However, you will get an error if you're going to try and change it to any future date, just so you know. So switching gears a bit to a different part of the EHR and looking at medications, specifically the new functionality involving medication fill history. There is an added functionality to the medication history feature. Current functionality provides medication history from PBM claims data, which lacks details from the pharmacy. So this is going to allow users to view the last fill date and SIG data from the pharmacy and include both sources of data. So you're looking at the PBM claim and data from the pharmacy that filled the medication. And that pharmacy data does not require Rx eligibility, and it does include medications paid by sources other than the insurance. And that data is visible in the existing medication history window. NextGen also added the ability to view real-time prescription cost and coverage information at the point of care through SureScripts. So this is going to include estimated cost, alternative medication options, pharmacy types, and coverage details. Now you must use the formulary search, and it does only work with PBM data. There is also a new RTPB notification alert. It just simply reminds the user, kind of a friendly reminder, you need to include the quantity, the units, the duration, and the pharmacy. It's going to display when the medication is in a temporary status, and then it'll disappear once the required fields are completed and the medication is saved, or it's now put in that active status. So once all the required fields are populated, that initial benefit request will be sent then automatically. Now, for this to work properly, there is some required setup in two places, both under System Admin Universal Preferences and then EHR User Preferences Formulary tab. Both of these are turned on or checked by default for all users. We just wanted to include this for your reference. There's also been some new fields added to the medication detail section in the medication module and ERX status window. So that estimated patient cost is going to display when the initial benefit response is returned. It updates if an alternative is selected, and it's going to clear when the medication is in that active status or if it's not saved as a chart. It also shows alternatives in pricing and coverage, and this displays when the initial benefit response is returned and shows the patient's PBM name, cost, and alternatives. So in that screenshot, you'll see the grid with various columns. First is going to be the drug type. This displays either as requested for the requested medication or alternative, which is provided per PBM based on the patient's benefits for the requested medication. Then we have the drug name. This is going to display the medication name and the dose strength. And you can actually hover over the medication name to see the entire text if you need to, if it's cut off. And then we have coverage 1. This is going to display the pharmacy coverage details based on the requested medication. If alternatives are returned, the pricing is based on what was sent in the initial request. It's also going to display the drug status code, so covered or not covered. And of course, hovering over the cell is going to display the pharmacy name for that particular coverage type. And then coverage 2 and coverage 3 columns, these are going to display pharmacy coverage details based on the patient's benefits. So a patient could have either a 30-day or a 90-day retail benefit, or maybe a mail order benefit, or even a specialty benefit. This is also going to display the drug status code. They added 3 pharmacy coverage options in case maybe a patient has multiple prescription benefit options, if you're wondering why there is 2 and 3. And then below that grid, you have the following information displaying based on the selected cell. So you have coverage alerts, so it's going to display prior auth status as yes or no, or even unable to determine. The quantity price, the day supply price, the OOP applied, and then deductible applied or remaining. And then you also have this button in the lower right-hand corner that says replace. This allows the user to actually replace the requested medication with an alternative. And then jumping back up to the top screenshot, you're going to see the pharmacy destination. So this is a new field added to, which added the pharmacy for the prescription prior to sending. So that primary preferred pharmacy is going to default, but other preferred pharmacies will be in that list. And it's just going to be your typical pharmacy search options available. This is not going to be specifically tied to an RTPB, but it is used to display pharmacy-related cost or coverage data. So a lot of info with this new feature. A lot of really nice updates and enhancements for the med module in 592.842. Again, just wanted to provide a quick overview of the workflow as a summary of what we went over. This is just going to be for your reference here to have when we send out the slides. But overall, a pretty streamlined workflow here. I think it's going to be a great predictor for patients to have an idea of what they will owe. Up next, just want to point out two changes to the first involving immunizations. So NextGen updated the immunizations rules engine for live vaccines. Now the system will mark live vaccine doses as a system exception or invalid when given within 28 days of another live vaccine. So currently the system already alerts the user if they try to order the second vaccine in this scenario, but as a user, they can ignore the alert or bypass it. If the user ignores the alert, the vaccine is going to show a status of exception. So what this feature is doing is adding dose validity function to the process. So this is going to use the existing workflow for ordering new vaccines, just enhances it a bit. You're still going to be alerted if a live vaccine is ordered too early. It's just now if the user ignores the alert, that vaccine dose is going to be flagged as a system exception in the chart. The second change to orders involves my favorite NextGen branding change, the adaptive content engine. Its new functionality has been added to allow a user to select multiple diagnosis codes for orders placed in a template. So previous functionality only allowed one diagnosis code per order, which we all know ICD-10 changed coding options and more often than not broke apart diagnoses that were previously a single code. So this made for a greater need to attach multiple codes for test. In response, a new link was added to most test order templates to launch a pop-up that's called Associate Multiple Diagnoses to Orders. It works with lab, radiology, and office orders. And this new template is going to allow you to connect up to 12 diagnosis codes to each order. And codes are going to be added in the order they're selected, but you can actually rearrange them once they're connected to the test. So moving away from orders and focusing on our next slides on interoperability functions and transition of care. So these areas are going to see a lot of attention in 2019, both from a regulatory perspective as well as an industry focal point. So let's start with the transition of care workflow. With this upgrade, there is a new visit type and template fields added in an effort to provide an easier workflow for transition of care visits. This has been added to family practice, internal medicine, pediatrics, and then OBGYN specialties. The template can be accessed through the updated Transitioning to Care link, which has also been added for interim history. So you can see there are panels for transitioning to care management and summary of care. So providers and clinical staff will be able to incorporate all necessary components, including new options to allow providers to submit the correct CPT codes that are used to bill for a transition of care visit. So NextGen updated the finalized template to allow proper billing by adding a new checkbox for a transition to care face-to-face visit. This will check automatically if transitioning into care template is used. And it will calculate the code based on the template and the medical decision-making selected. So this is a huge improvement and a feature I think will make a big difference in helping providers get the correct reimbursement for these types of visits. Looking at a tool used in the transition of care process are handy-dandy CCDAs. Now, this update is more focused on the reconciliation process, and it's going to increase efficiency by quickly being able to tell the reconciliation status. So these visual indicators were added to the main toolbar on the Categories tab and within the CCDA custom viewer to show that status. We know all too well regulatory measures, cough, cough, MIPS, require meds, allergies, and problems to be reconciled at minimum. But all sections of the document can have this functionality. So this is going to require some user level configuration in two areas. First, you're going to have to right-click the transition of care category and select Show Reconciliation Status option. And then in the CCDA custom viewer configuration, there's a drop-down menu option to show reconciliation status. for all the sections, meds, allergies, problems, or none. So this enhancement would affect clinical users who view or reconcile any of your CCDAs at your practice. So that warning or caution icon displays for any documents that need to be reconciled, and then the green check mark only after, it shows only after meds, allergies, and problems, all three of those are reconciled in some way. On to one of our more difficult to remember branding changes, the Clinical Message Manager, aka Rosetta Holding Tank, and the EHR inbox. So once you upgrade, users will now see an option to show a new tab in the workflow module for Message Manager view. This displays stats for lab results, documents, HIE documents, allergies, medications, and cardiac devices that are going to be currently in the Clinical Message Manager, or the CMM, as NextGen's calling it. This is going to give users an easier way to know that something has been received without having to actually launch the CMM. Now, this is a read-only view, but it will give you a quick visual reference on those messages. So important note, users will not be able to act on the records displayed in the Clinical Message Manager view. The messages will still need to be reprocessed in the Clinical Message Manager. This is an optional feature, and it's controlled by a security right. It's going to be under Operations and Clinical Message Manager. With the access rights given, there's also preferences setting when you are on the new Message Manager view tab. The user will have the option to either automatically include orphaned items, display transaction history information, and then set a maximum of detail rows. And that is defaulted at right now. So again, this is really going to only affect any clinical users who work with items that route to the CMM. You can see from the screenshot that top grid is a summary data view of all the items in the CMM. Each column can be sorted by clicking on it. This would be the same as clicking on the individual items on the left side. And there's an option to include, like I said, orphan rows in these counts. If the user preference was set, this will not have to be checked manually. And then that bottom grid shows how many items have been worked through during the current day and by which user. And then if that date range that's selected actually contains no data, a helpful message is actually going to show up so the user knows. It'll say, there is no data to display based on your selected date filter. Please change your date filter to view other data. And then lastly, there's a way to actually launch the CMM from the new tab in the workflow module, which we called out in that screenshot as a red box around it. But just a heads up, if you do click that, the user could see a warning, and it'll show up if there's already an instance of the CMM open. There's also the added ability to include a deletion reason for Clinical Message Manager items. We heard it as well. Clients wanted to be able to add a reason when deleting a message from the interface queue tables for tracking purposes. So the solution was to add a permission to be able to add a reason. So if you have permission, a pop-up in the Clinical Message Manager to enter the reason will show. So if that universal preference is set to true, the user will be prompted with enter reason for delete when the delete button is clicked. A reason would be entered in the text box, and then the user would have the option to save or cancel and return to the CMM. NextGen also added a transaction history tab in the CMM. We have heard times from clients they wanted to be able to audit their users. Essentially, clients wanted the ability to find a process message that a vendor stated they had sent, but it's not appearing in the patient's chart. So once the transaction is matched, there's no way to determine if a transaction hit the CMM or how it was matched. So we understand clients wanted the ability to run a report against the Clinical Message Manager that allows users to monitor and track messages that are being committed to the patient's chart. So the solution was to add this functionality in the new Transaction History tab of the Clinical Message Manager. Users will need a permission in the system admin to allow the export of the history log as a CSV file. And there is a separate right to view transaction history for all users. By default, these rights are going to be set to no, so you'll have to go in and change them. So what this is going to do, it's going to allow you to search incoming message data by name, NextGen order number, external order number, and date of birth on the new tab. There is matched to the message data lookup that allows you to click the search icon and actually launch the patient lookup. So users can search by date range or launch a user search from the administrative items section. And the user search is going to be limited to just those messages that the currently logged in user processed in some way. The transaction history detail will display when one of the messages in the search results is actually selected. The user can see the incoming message data detail on the left and the data after commit on the right. So this example shows that the user made a patient match and then decided to commit that to the patient's chart. Speaking of industry topics that are going to be a focal point in 2019, a big one this year is going to be population health. NextGen Analytics, or what was priorly known or called beforehand was Eagle Dream, will be integrated into the core application. So I will point out, you do need to actually be using NextGen Analytics already for this to work, but if you are, you should be able to see these icons added to the patient information bar and Population Health Management Hub. This is in a hopes to increase point of care access and improve the patient care. So these indicators have been added in both places. They're going to identify gaps in care and your risk score. So these are going to display the current number of measures and their respective statuses and allow any user to hover over an indicator to view the status details. So those gaps in care indicators are the triangles. They're going to show the current number of measures and statuses. Green will be meeting the goal. If it's yellow, it's going to be near due. And then if it's orange, it'll be past due. And red, they're not meeting the goal. And then the risk score indicator is going to be that circle that shows the current risk score and level. Blue will be 0. Green will be 1, and that'll be healthy. Yellow will be 2, and that'll be low. Orange is 3, moderate. Red, 4, high. And maroon, 5 is very high. So very similar color scheme that we've got going on. Of course, you can click on any indicator to launch the full patient population health profile from NextGen Analytics as well. And of course, there is some setup for both integrations, which I included. If you do want to use this, you're going to have to open a support case, most likely to fill in that API options and gaps in care path in the PMH administrator. But if you are using NextGen Analytics, we included this slide for your reference as well. And then wrapping up this section, we have a few slides of kind of odds and ends updates that we wanted to share with you, but can be kind of found all over the EHR. And the first one is this user work group removal. So this expanded upon functionality to deactivate users in 591. Previously, any tasks were reassigned, but the work group would remain. Now, users that are deactivated will also be removed from user work groups. And work groups that have 0 members are going to be hidden to prevent tasks from being sent to that work group. You still can unhide the work group in file maintenance under task work groups, but this is going to help users out drastically when they are removing users from work groups. Just keep in mind, all tasks or PAQ items for that user or work group will still have to be reassigned. And there are some changes with service categories. Basically, any changes made to a service category will now be based on the logged in practice. This allows changes to categories for one practice in an enterprise. So all service categories items will now have a practice ID assigned. The full list of categories will still show for all practices since it is a system master file. Individual items within the category will be based on the practice that added them. Categories do not need to be modified upon upgrade. Practices will still have access to all existing items automatically, thanks to a migration script. Once changes are made post-upgrade, the logged in practice will be the only one to see them. Any new or copied service categories will display for all users. And SIM codes associated with the category will only be seen by that logged in practice. So this isn't going to change the workflow for end users at all. But to do this, you're just going to go to Access File Maintenance, System Master Files, and then Service Categories. You'll see the table still looks the same. Just note the logged in practice when modifying, which we circled in that yellow color at the top here. And then a smaller change that allows for more information on the master document is just the inclusion of order details. So you're going to see the reason, dosing information, any clinical information or comments, as well as the reaction, interpretation, and then the performed date and reason as well. NextGen also updated its dynamic HPI to allow better documentation of right and left indicators for symptoms and location as a single list. And lastly, the CARE guidelines were updated to include reference and citations. So since the National Guideline Clearinghouse is no longer funded, NextGen updated these references and citations from various places like the CDC, or I know they're using the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force, and then a few other organizations as well. All right, well, that is it for the EHR application updates. We do have a few brief specialty-specific updates we wanted to mention with the release. Those are going to be for OBGYN, orthopedic, and ophthalmology, but I'm going to turn it over to Cindy to take you through these as well as our PM updates. So Cindy, it is all yours.
All right, thank you. I'm going to breeze through these as quickly as I can because I know we're running short on time and we want to get through the entire presentation. I do want to let you know that, as Chelsea mentioned, I have dropped off this call 3 times throughout. So if I drop, Adam's standing by to take over for me, although he's already dropped off once. So we are definitely having some network challenges in Columbus, Ohio. So the first thing we're going to talk about are the OB-GYN updates. I do want to mention these updates in specialty specific are largely defect fixes. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the EDD Edit Log Functionality. There has been a new panel added for the EDD Edit Log, and that is allowing the current logic of the EDD is not correct. So basically what happens now is when user 1 adds EDD-related data on the EDD panel of the gestational age template, it inserts an entry under the EDD log. When user 2 just visits the gestational age template and does not modify anything, the system still updates the previous log record with the name of user 2. This is a defect that has been fixed in the fall 2008 release. So to take a look at the EDD edit log, if you look at the edit log, this just shows an addition of a historical EDD log so that you can look at this because they created a new one and you now have the ability to look at the historical log. So this is, again, just something that has been changed in terms of being able to resolve that defect. If we move on to orthopedic, in the orthopedic, the fractures, casting, and strapping procedure template, when the user entered data in this particular template and then didn't select the fracture care field, the order was displaying as blank in the order management template. This was a defect that has been fixed in this template. This is a day 1 impact feature. There's no additional setup or configuration. It will work right out of the box, provided you have not modified this template. As a new casting, strapping, DME only checkbox was added along with some additional business logic to fix this issue, the user will now select either fracture care field and initial treatment date, or select the new casting, strapping, DME only checkbox, and after adding the order, it will display properly in the order management template. If the user doesn't select the fracture care field or the casting, strapping, DME only checkbox, it will launch an alert. And this is just a sample when there was data entered in the casting, splinting, strapping section and no data entered. This just shows you that it was showing as blank, and they've added this field to accommodate that. And then once again, you just either select either the fracture care code or initial treatment date, select the casting, strapping, DME only checkbox, or select the fracture care code, and then it will launch the alert and just giving you the samples of those. And adds the order to the grid. And then the order management displays properly, and the description is now casting, strapping, DME. Moving on to ophthalmology, this has been given a little bit of a facelift. So any edits or deletions made to the records or the provider communication template can now be tracked. So when the provider communication template changes, the new audit log link provides access to the audit log where the user will be able to view the edited, deleted records and the modifications made. So this is actually one of the nicer things that I think they've done because it needed to be addressed. fundamentally what had to happen here is we needed to have the ability to see the audits as it was going through, and a lot of providers have actually requested this, or users that are putting in the provider communications back and forth. It filters all records, edited records, deleted, all records, edited records, deleted records. The top grid is the same as the provider communication grid. The bottom audit log grid will display modifications of the selected record from the top grid. And if a user selects a row from the current grid on the existing provider communications pop-up, then launches the new audit log pop-up from the audit log link, it will automatically highlight that record in the top grid and display the log of changes in the bottom grid. So as you can see, when you highlight it, you will see what has occurred on each of those particular line items. The new provider communication document will display the communication records entered for the current encounter. There was a cosmetic change on Eyeglasses Rx, the ophthalmology template. This was cosmetic only. Instructional text with optics has been removed from the glasses prescription to print section on the Eyeglass Rx ophthalmology. And now we'll move on to the PM features. Again, we went through those pretty quickly, and unless you had a specific issue with some of these areas, those past slides were probably not too meaningful for you. But if you have any specific questions, we'll be happy to take you through the benefits. As for the agenda of the PM, no-show cancellation alerts are now separate. There's a Medicare over 65 alert, insurance maintenance enhancements, SOGI protected content, real-time address validation, balance control tips, and automated prior authorization. The no-show cancellation alerts. The alerts, no-show, and cancellations have now been separated. I personally think this is a great feature. These were always kind of lumped in together. So if you see the 4592, the patient had 15 appointments were canceled or a no-show. So you really didn't know which was which, and that's a pretty big difference. No-shows are more important. I think my screens are moving pretty quickly, so we definitely have some delays here. So it also shows, kind of going back to that one, it also shows then that the cancellations are separate, and a cancellation is much better than a no-show. As for the Medicare over 65 alert, we added the ability to mark a payer as a Medicare replacement payer, and this will prevent unnecessary Medicare alerts when covered under Medicare Advantage plans. The insurance maintenance window benefits info tab. This is also a nice feature. The benefits info tab, it has been in the past a system-wide default. So any practice within the system, if it was turned on, can access the information on the tab. It can create PHI exposure issue. That was been pointed out several times. So now you can restrict this to an individual practice, and you actually have some preferences that you can put in and add to the security groups. So, for example, System Administrator Universal Preferences, General Options, System Level Benefit Info. When set to false, this can restrict access only to the practice where the patient chart exists. You can also report on unassigned records if set to the practice level. Moving on to the SOGI field protected content, they've also increased the security associated with this. So in 591, a universal preference setting was added to hide the sexual orientation and gender identity fields in all applications to the EHR. This will no longer be an option. And that was kind of a first step in this because they knew they had to do something, but now they've expanded it. So now the enterprise preference replaces the universal preference. They've added protected content tab, and you can now choose from each SOGI field. And when marked as protected, it will only be visible to the users with security rights. In security rights, they've added operations and displayed protected content. Then the users or the person setting this up can select rights for each SOGI field. So you can do this field by field. Another new feature that has been added that there was a lot of excitement about, but there is some setup associated with this, is real-time address validation with USPS. So this can be used in PM. You can add modified patient information, billing secondary addresses, add modified person information, the guarantor relationship contact. So this can be used also in file maintenance with your payers, providers, employers. So basically this goes anywhere throughout the system where there's an address, and it can actually validate through the USPS web tool. So to configure this, because there is some setup, and it can be extensive, you enable address validation, so you do this as a checkbox in Practice Preferences, external tab. You register users for USPS Web Tools at the link in Practice Preferences, external tab. Here is the important note. Each NextGen user must have their own unique username. So during registration, the user will leave the website address field blank. Then you enable security rights in the system administration. So in operations, your chart demographics user, USPS address validation. Then in file maintenance, you go to that area. Then you set up your external user mapping for the web tool. So there's an external tab for each user. Think about your users. If you have a lot of users that are doing file maintenance or patient registration or wherever you're using this, that can be onerous. So every user must be added. And then this just takes you through how to do it, and then you can use a NextGen import wizard to quickly map all the USPS usernames. So there is an import wizard you can do with it using a spreadsheet for those of you who've used it. Regardless, there is some significant setup. And because of that, I haven't had a lot of people who have jumped on this just yet. And there's not a lot of people in 592. It is relatively new. This will tell you how to do it, though. If you do get through the setup to valid patient address, it will look at Street 1, Street 2, city, state, and zip fields. And when the address is saved, it will be validated. And once that's done, you'll see a link, whether you see USPS with a little green check mark, and then those with a yellow triangle with not, you use the address that was not suggested by the USPS, or it was unable to validate it, meaning that it's incomplete. So you've either got a green check mark or the little yellow exclamation point or caution sign. There has been an info button added to the balance control with tips for users. And they've also added, which is, in my opinion, a pretty nice feature, offsetting balance cleanup. So a lot of times when you have those offsetting balances in balance control, so they've now added the ability to reconcile offsetting credit and debit balances. So if you have a credit in one and a debit in the other, those are obviously offset, and why would you want to have to go in and clean those individually? The balance are cleaned up using the data maintenance history, non-history status report. So there is a report, and to research offsetting balances from the report, basically you run the report, and then you can right-click and select chart or balance control. And then to correct the offsetting balances from the report, so you find one you want to correct it, you simply choose to correct just this one error, or you can do all instances or all fixable errors in the report. So if you don't feel the need, you have to become confident with it. If you don't feel the need to go and look at every one of them, you can actually generate the report and correct all errors associated in one single sitting. They've added the ability to submit prior authorizations electronically, so you can easily submit prior authorization transactions using eligibility verification, as using the new acronyms, but formerly RTS. You can verify with payers if they have a prior authorization on file. Then you can automatically populate the returned authorization number, effective dates, and number of users. As with the USPS, there is some configuration involved in this. First of all, you must have RTS. And practice preferences and even payer-specific options are involved. So that's really the high-level it for PM and some of the specialty content, which was largely bug fixes. Did move through it pretty quickly. Sorry about that, but we did want to try and stick to our schedule so we can get to all of your questions. So let's talk about next steps. If you're uncertain where your practice stands, let iTentive help. We can help by assessing your current readiness, providing recommendations, and implementation of new processes and procedures. You can visit us at iTentive.com. You can sign up for our webinars and blogs. Consider our 3-day fixed price on-site consultations. Those include clinical workflow, revenue cycle, technology and performance, and many others. And then you can test drive our products, Refund Manager, ChartGuard, and several others that we have floating out there, billing assistance. So a lot of new ones being introduced every day. So let's get to questions now. Again, I think I did that in record time, so I'm sorry for being so quick, but I was A, afraid I was going to drop off, and B, wanted to get through in the scheduled time. So
that was impressively fast, Cindy.
Thank you. I guess.
Okay, so moving on to questions. Again, you can type any questions that you have in the webinar control panel to your right. or wherever it is. It's on the right of my screen, sorry. But you can type your questions in there, and we're going to go through them in the order that we received them. So far, we only have 3. So if you have questions, we will likely have time to answer them. So first question, is there a chikungunya questionnaire?
I can take this one. So far, we've not seen that this specific questionnaire exists in the upgraded version.
Thanks, Adam. Next question. Since population health will be more integrated, is population health still a separate purchase? Cindy, you want to grab that?
I can take this one. Yeah, I can take this one. So basically, what they have done is population health is still available as a separate purchase. It is now included as part of NextGen Analytics. So if you purchase NextGen Analytics, you get population health. If you purchase population health independently, you will pay based on what I've seen. Now, again, please check with your NextGen sales rep, account executive, because they may have different information than we have. Based on what I've seen, it is the standard pricing as it was before. So fundamentally, you're going to pay more for it if you purchase it separate and distinct from NextGen Analytics.
Thank you, Cindy. Next question. Is there a cost per user for USPS address validation?
Yeah, I can take that. I can take that as well. So what we've seen so far, it does look like it is a free service through the USPS, but during the registration process, it will definitely give you a lot more information.
I can tell you from NextGen's perspective, there's no charge. I am not entirely certain if there's no charge from USPS. I don't think there is, because I think it's to their benefit. That's something as you go through it, check with one user, or even just check with the post office. I'm sure they could answer that. In fact, Adam, let's go ahead. Let's us check. Okay, so we'll check and send out an update to everybody. We'll just talk to the post office and see if there's any charge for this. I don't think there is. NextGen is not charging for the integration.
Perfect. So we will send out an answer for that for sure when we send out a link to the recording and slides within the next week or so. Next question. Are you finding areas of 592.842 that are performing poorly, i.e. slow template load time?
I can take this. I have found that this is honestly all over the place. And what I mean by that is it varies many times with your equipment, with your network, and also with your level of customization, and perhaps even some of the stored procedures that you have in the system. There are a lot of things that I can advise when you're upgrading, and we've encountered this with all 5.9s, the entire 5.9.8.4 series. I want to emphasize first, I have found these to be so much better than any of the previous upgrades. So NextGen is improved by leaps and bounds. So we will occasionally have these circumstances when we're upgrading one client that we didn't encounter with the last one. And you're looking at it and you think everything is the same, even down to the same specialty. And what we have found is that throughout time there's different stored procedures, different things that NextGen will make you aware of as you're going through the testing process to get it on, and maybe they haven't incorporated it into the full upgrade because not everyone needs it. My best advice is test, test, test. And particularly do your best to test your performance. Overall, I've not seen what I would call systematic performance problems, but occasionally there are things, and I will say that we have been very successful in getting NextGen to work very quickly on trying to resolve those.
Thanks, Cindy. Looks like this one's probably another one for you. Do you have any pre-visit planning template thoughts or advice?
I'm a big fan of pre-visit planning, particularly if you are using any type of population health or patient outreach. Not knowing your practice, I just think that it's really good to kind of incorporate that with like a morning huddle, or perhaps on the schedule the next day as part of your confirmation. I've worked with groups doing both. It does seem to be very, very helpful with the providers to be able to have that information in, and you can move through your visits more quickly and be prepared with things that you need to incorporate into your patient's wellness. It's definitely something that I think goes in concert with either morning huddles or any type of patient outreach that you could do in advance of the patient coming in. So I would just say my advice is to incorporate it if it's appropriate for your practice. Not knowing your specialty, it can vary from group to group, but I'm a big fan. I think it's really, really something they needed to incorporate a long time ago.
Great, thanks, Cindy. Next question. Has NextGen resolved the issue of items in the category tab in date order, i.e. testing. We have done various tests in this category, echo, EKG, nuclear, etc., but they are not in date order. We must group all the same tests together in order to get them into date order, but this is very time-consuming for the physicians. Context, we are currently in 591.92.
Adam, I don't think there's been any change to that, and I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I haven't seen any changes like specifically to that as like a NextGen known issue being resolved. I know like it kind of depends where you're looking at, like in the categories view, like it definitely should sort newest to oldest in the category. If you're looking at the grids, there might be some like template customizations you can do to make them filter differently or sort differently.
But out of the box, I've heard that complaint as well, and I think NextGen's aware of it. I don't know that they're considering it a defect. You know, when you talk to them, there's a lot of different answers that you get. I think, you know, Adam, you've probably experienced that as well, just in terms of why it behaves the way it does in certain circumstances, but it can be very frustrating.
Okay, thanks, guys. Next and possibly last question. Is Care Guidelines 2.0 better, and how?
Okay, well, I'll take that one too. I can say yes, it's better. It's more organized, it's more structured, it has a better integration into the system. It utilizes the disease management better. I'm probably using old terms, but it utilizes the disease management. Is it perfect? No. Does it have a place to go? Yes. We're looking forward to 3.0, which will not work with until I think it's going to be 593, maybe they're going to incorporate it with 592. I know that Care Guidelines 2.0 will not work with 592 if I've got this right. There's a whole grid of when these work and everything, and I apologize, I don't have all of them memorized, but I can tell you need to make sure about your version. I would look very closely in going to 2. If you're on the existing version and using it, I think you'll benefit from it. If you're just now thinking about using it, take a look at Care Guidelines 2.0 and then maybe look at the plans they have for 3.0.
Okay, perfect. Well, it looks like that's our last question, and we just hit our hour. So we did it! Yay!
Oh, very good.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Again, we'll be sending out a recording to the slides and a link to the slides within the next week or so, and they'll be up on our website as well. Feel free to, you see both Cindy and Lindsay's information up on the screen. Feel free to reach out to them if you have any questions after this, or you can always reply to any of the emails that I send you with webinar invites or recordings or anything like that. We'd love to help. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you so much for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.